So from Cresswell's reading, you got introduced to concepts such as place, space, location, and landscape. I want to elaborate on some of those just a little and talk about some other important concepts that are key to geography. One is spatiality. Now, this is a sense of a sort of interconnection between humans and the spaces that they inhabit. So rather than thinking of space as something out there that has an effect on humans that humans can't change, we need to think about how these things are mutually intertwined. So people can have an effect on space, and space in turn can have an effect on people. For example, you might walk into a traditional classroom and have the desks arranged in neat rows, and that might sort of precipitate a certain kind of set of behaviors that people would engage in. For example, having the instructor at the front of the room in a sort of position of authority and the students sitting in these rows listening. But the students in that classroom and the instructor have the opportunity to be able to change the spatiality of that room, to perhaps put the desks in a circle and have a more open dialogue where students have more of a chance to talk to each other and to the instructor, and that's integrated within the class. So these things are fluid, dynamic, and changeable. Now, Cresswell introduced the idea of landscape as sort of the observable surface of the earth. And one of the things that I want to bring up in relation to this is this notion of landscape being both a social, economic, and political process. And we can see landscape changes historically through time. So one geographer has looked at this through the notion of stratification. Stratification is often used when talking about geology or the formation of rocks. So you have different layers of sediment that pile up over time. So we can think about this in terms of the built environment, how that's shaped by previous histories that exist in particular locations. A great example of it is this image from London, England. So here you see within this landscape image both historical artifacts, a Roman wall that was built around 200 AD, but you also see modern office buildings beyond that. So it's rarely a landscape is just a clean slate that has sort of diminished what existed before it. Here's another example of landscape. And if we look at this picture, we realize that there must be certain things that have been taken out of the image itself. So here we see a woman reclining on vacation. You see the beach. And basically a lovely image. But if we take a second and think about what's outside of the frame here, we have probably other vacationers here on the beach as well, perhaps this family of screaming kids just off camera. There's all of the work that went into probably flying this woman into the location, her waged work that might have paid for the vacation itself. There's also the workers that maintain this place, all the food and resources that are shipped in to be able to feed and clothe the vacationers that are here. So a lot of different things that landscape images sort of close out of our understanding if we don't think about it critically. Another key aspect of geographic thinking is the notion of scale. And we talked about scale in relation to being a map feature and the relationship between the distance on a map and the distance on the ground. But geographers also use scale as a way of organizing and thinking about geographic difference. Often you can think of it as zooming a camera in or out. So you might zoom in very close and have a lot of detail over a small area, or zoom out and be able to see a large area with not a lot of detail. So in this sense, you have kind of different levels of representation that you're using to look at different geographic processes. So whatever scale you might use for analysis might give you different results, which means that it has sort of political significance in terms of what scale that we're using. For an example, you might look at a problem on the global scale or on the local scale of your hometown. One of the scales that we're going to focus on a lot in this class, because it's world regional geography, is the scale of the world region. So a world region is an extensive geographical division based on continental and physiographic settings that contains major clusters of humankind with broadly similar cultural attributes. A good example is Latin America, where the majority of the folks speak Spanish or Portuguese, where they have a history of colonialism under the Spanish or Portuguese, etc. This map shows the world regions that your textbook. Here's another example of a map that breaks a place up into regions. So you have generic names for soft drinks by county in the United States. So places in the blue are areas that call soft drinks pop. Places in the red are areas that call soft drinks Coke, and places in the yellow are areas that call soft drinks sodas. So, you're seeing cultural characteristics that are similar based on some particular attribute. This happens to be names for soft drinks, but you can look at the United States in terms of regions in this sense, just a sort of fun example. Some other key scales for analysis include the state, and the way that we talk about state in this class, it's going to be synonymous with country rather than state how we use it in the United States. And when we look at this definition for state, we can think about it as a politically organized territory that's administered by a sovereign government recognized by a significant portion of the international community, having a permanent resident population and an organized economy. I want to contrast this with this idea of a nation. Now, we're going to refer to nation in this class as a group of people that have a shared identity. They have common elements of culture, religion, language, history, or political identity. So it's kind of an imagined community, and people then identify with that group or community. Now, these things might seem rather self-evident, but we can talk about these in relation to actual geopolitical events on the ground, and then you begin to see how they might be more important. An example of a sort of classic nation state where you have a group of people with their shared identity lining up with a sovereign country is Japan. So you have a homogeneous group of people governed by their own state. But it becomes more complicated when we think about how there are many nations that don't actually have a state. For example, the Kurdish people in Southwest Asia. This is a group of people that has a shared identity, but they're spread across numerous states. Northern Iraq, Turkey, Iran, some in Syria as well. And often when you see places of conflict in the world, you can look at this notion of nations and statehood and see that as a point of tension. Another scale that's important to geographers is community, which is kind of the scale of your sort of daily social interactions and personal relationships. And then home is another scale that's important, which is the physical setting to the structure and dynamics of families and households. Another important concept in geography is the idea of boundaries. This is a sort of set of markers or symbols that delineates one place from another. Sometimes these boundaries are formal in that they're established by law, on maps, and aggressively defended, often by different nations or often by different states. So a great example of that is the border between North and South Korea as a highly militarized border, or the Israeli security fence that separates Israelis from Palestinians. But there can also be more informal borders, such as sort of sales areas for different companies, gang turf, those sorts of things.